Call this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, March 7th. It is 9 a.m. All council members are present, town manager, town attorney, town clerk. We are at 2731 Oak Street, the Bay Oaks new facility. If you'll please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item for discussion is the FMB Draft Long-Term Recovery Plan. Who's leading us off? Dan? Morning.
Good morning. Jacob, is it ready to go? Okay. Good morning, Mayor, council members, staff, town staff. My name is Dan Tomczak. I am one of the contract team members that has been working with the town of Fort Myers Beach, specifically the staff, Andy, Frankie, Jason, and Jeff, and now Mark and Chad. Probably going back to June of last year, we've been working with the town. And so I'm here just to present, we pulled together a draft long-term recovery plan, which was part of the scope that the FEMA Community Assistance was asked to do for the town. And the draft plan was submitted back in January. And so I'm here just to present to the town, about the plan and really kind of summarize what we've been doing. Because again, we've been working with the town going back to last June. And so there's been a lot going on. And so I know this is my first time presenting to the council on what we've been doing, but I'm gonna try to, I have a short presentation. I'm gonna try to keep it to 15, 20 minutes. I know you guys have a lot of other things on your agenda. So I will just, again, just kind of briefly go through what we've been doing. Again, my name is Dan Tomczak. I am with the FEMA Community Assistance team. I'm part of the contract team that is working with FEMA, and been working really. We as in FEMA Community Assistance we've been involved with a number of communities around the Fort Myers area, Sanibel, the city of Fort Myers, of course, Fort Myers Beach, Arcadia, Hardy County, and Eatonville, which is up near Orlando. We've been basically doing, similar projects and similar work for those communities as well. So again, I've been focused mostly on Fort Myers Beach, and that's what I'll be presenting here today. So who is FEMA Community Assistance? I think many of you have heard of Public Assistance PA, individual assistance through FEMA. Community assistance is basically it's a coordination of different programs and federal government agencies that have come together to try to identify ways to assist communities that have gone through a disaster like Hurricane Ian, and find ways to help these communities move forward with their recovery. And again, so it's really kind of a team effort. It's not just FEMA, and I'll kind of get into the other partners that we have worked with on this program. So we are using the whole community approach. This is a diagram of kind of showing that we're pulling in, the residents, the leaders, the staff from the town, the different organizations within the community, could be the Chamber of Commerce, could be the universities within the area, pulling them all together to try to come up with a kind of a team approach to address this so that we're getting input from everyone that's really has a stake in helping the community move forward. You know, I mentioned about the other federal agencies or federal groups that are part of this. So again, FEMA Community Assistance, that's who I was working with, but we are also working with, you know, a number of other federal agencies, from economic development to health and human services, HUD, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. EPA, who will be here tomorrow to talk about some of the projects. They'll be here talking to the town about some of the projects that they have in store, as well as the Department of Interior. So again, there's a lot of different agencies that are involved because each of these agencies have programs that could assist the town in again, helping them with their recovery. So the whole point of this project and with community assistance is trying to pull in all these other groups and seeing how they could potentially assist the town. So community assistance, we basically look at identifying the different areas that the town needs assistance. We kind of categorize them in 6 different what we call project themes, from planning, economic recovery, infrastructure, which I think we'll get to is the big thing, especially after a disaster like Hurricane Ian, housing, natural and cultural resources, and then health and social services. So we look at the needs that the community has and try to put those projects or put those needs into one of these 6 different themes, and then be able to go to the other resources that we have, the other federal agencies, to see how can they support the different projects that the town has identified. So what has community assistance been doing or been involved with the town? Probably going back to, it was probably June, I think, when we first started having weekly meetings with the town, and kind of discussing what the needs are from the town, what are identifying the different projects. We call them the unfunded or unmet needs projects that the town had identified, working through developing this long-term recovery plan, which I'll be getting to here shortly. Assisting, we've also been involved with assisting with a socioeconomic impacts analysis, which was done to look at, we had an economist kind of look at how Hurricane Ian impacted the overall economy within the town of Fort Myers Beach, and then how things are beginning to move forward. And then lastly, one of the other areas that we've been helping the town with is identifying needs of funding, because in the end, a lot of the projects, they need funding. I mean that's a key thing. And so we've been trying to, look at, and again, by reaching out, it's not so much coming out of the FEMA pot, but it's also reaching out to the other agencies, to the EPA, to the Army Corps of Engineers, to Department of Interior, and seeing if they have resources that could assist the town with the different projects that they have going on. So some other areas that we've been involved with, again, really kind of the main focus for what we've been doing is pulling together this long-term recovery plan. We did, and some of you may have attended the workshops that we had back in September. There were 2 workshops where Frankie spoke on the short-term projects that the town had been working on, And then we had spoke on the long-term recovery projects that had been identified. There was also kind of to coincide with those workshops. There was an online survey that was done, and we ended up getting 385 respondents. It was out for about a month. It was online or it was live, and again, kind of focusing on getting input from the whole purpose of the survey was to get input from the community on what did the community see was important for the town to look into, what were some of the visions or what were some of the goals that the community members had, and then thirdly, going through some of these projects the town had identified. I mean, there was a number of projects that will be receiving funding from PA, and I know the town has received some of the grants through the state to help them with some of the projects, but then there are still other projects that the town had identified, but at that point we were looking at ways to try to find funding and try to move those projects forward. There we go. A few other areas we've been involved with the town. Again, I mentioned earlier, we've been having weekly, and then it kind of went to bi-weekly meetings with the town. We've been able to bring in other resources. We've reached out to Florida Gulf Coast University and brought in faculty members to come in and talk to the town. And we had a staff from FGCU and from Naples Botanical Gardens that came in and spoke to the town about some of the work that they're working on with Naples in looking at beach restoration, and so again, just trying to bring in other people from the community and talk to the town about certain things that are going on. Again, I mentioned earlier we did the socioeconomic impacts analysis for the town of Fort Myers Beach as a result of Hurricane Ian. And then we were also providing some GIS support early on when we were looking at mapping some of the parcels and properties that were going on the market, so that we can kind of have an overall viewing of what properties were coming on the market in case the town was interested in moving forward with potential purchases. So what is the recovery? So getting into the recovery plan, it's basically a document that helps to summarize a lot of different things that happened due to a certain impact like Hurricane Ian was. We looked at looking at the damage that happened to the communities. What are some of the gaps and needs? After a community comes through an event like a hurricane, there's a lot of needs that the town has. And so we're trying to kind of pull together a listing of those gaps and needs. Again, we looked at the different projects that were needed to address those gaps, and then also identifying funding sources and partners to try to help the town move forward with some of these projects. So what are some of the uses for this recovery plan? It's really to help identify priorities, for the community, because with all the different projects that are out there, there's going to be a kind of a prioritization of those projects, and kind of sitting down with the town and saying, okay, infrastructure, again, very, a big item for the town. What specific infrastructure items did the town identify as priority? Was it utilities, stormwater? I mean, stormwater was definitely a big item. So it's basically kind of going through the different projects and prioritizing them. Identifying partners. I mentioned earlier, not just federal partners, but even local nonprofits, philanthropy. There's a lot of funding that's out there, and trying to identify those partners that can help the town was also part of it, part of the plan. And again, it's really, and finally, it's a way to approach really kind of short-term, medium-term, and long-term recovery. Because again, we've had many conversations with the town after an event like Ian. The town's first thing is looking at, we need to get ourselves back on our feet, and so they're really, the town's really focused on what needs to be done immediately. But with the long-term plan, it's like it's just to kind of step back and say, okay, where does the town want to be 5 years from now? What are some of the goals and visions for the town to be more resilient? We hear that word a lot, but that's, I think living in a coastal community like Fort Myers Beach, resiliency and try to identify ways to be more resilient is something that you will continue to hear more of. All right, just briefly kind of go through the plan itself. It's a big plan. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of briefly summarize what it is, and have some some photographs or posts of areas that came out of the plan itself. But basically, the areas that we kind of focus on, the scope itself, we looked at resilience considerations for the town. What are some things that the town could do in bringing in resiliency as it looks to the recovery process. A community overview, kind of a little bit of a history of the town, how it's developed to where it's at today, and then the recovery projects. And again, what the projects are those unfunded projects that the town had identified, and looking at trying to prioritize them, based on what the town felt, what the town, and then even, pulling in input from the community as well. And that's kind of where we looked at the survey, we looked at the feedback that we got from the community during those workshops back in September, and trying to, again, pull together the overall prioritization of the projects themselves. Some of the things, and I mentioned earlier where there was those, the 6 themes, the infrastructure, community planning, economic recovery, housing, health and social services, and natural and cultural resources. And again, what we did is we looked at the projects that the town had identified, and then rolled them into one of these 6 categories or 6 themes. And again, why is that? Because then when we look at funding purposes, we say, okay, well, the projects that were under, say, infrastructure. Well, what are the partners that we could reach out to for infrastructure? Where it could be the Corps of Engineers, DOT, the state, DEP. There's a lot of different partners out there that we can reach out to, and to look at those particular projects. And then what we did is the third column, or the column on the right, we listed out, we kind of described some of the projects that were identified. The one I have here is stormwater capacity and reliability improvements. Was one of the projects that was identified. And so we kind of do a description of the projects. We look at the approximate, costs. Does the town need to do some initial feasibility study prior to that? And then what are some of the potential funding sources that the town could look into for that particular project? A few other areas that were included within the plan. We also looked at the Social Vulnerability Index and environmental justice. I think, what you see a lot, especially in grants, different grants that are out there, is they want to know about the environmental justice impacts. And so we wanted to have some information within this recovery plan that the town could use as a resource to pull from, in being able to apply for grants and other funding opportunities. And then lastly, we did summarize the workshops that were done back in September. We pulled together the results. There's a lot of, from the online survey, we kind of did a lot of pie chart. You'll see in the plan, there's a lot of pie charts that kind of graph out all of the results that came from the online survey. Another part that was submitted, in addition to, it was a separate document, but it's still part of the recovery plan, what we call the project planning workbook. It was basically an Excel. It was basically a large Excel file that had multiple tabs and listed all of the projects that the town had identified, the ranking process that the town went through in identifying the priority for those different projects. We had other tabs in there on that talked about the community demographics, funding. We had a section in there on permitting. We didn't go to say, okay, for this particular project, here are the permits that you will need. It's more of a kind of a resource that the town could look to see what potential permits may be needed or that they would have to look into for, because each project's going to require different permitting. And so this was just to kind of give an idea of what potential, local, state, federal permitting areas that would need to be considered. Again, strategic partners, who are the different partners out there that help with this, and then the prioritization criteria that went into kind of ranking or prioritizing the projects that the town had identified. Partnerships, mentioned about partnerships, in addition to the work we've been doing, the EPA has a program, what they call R2P2, which is a Recovery and Resiliency Partnership Projects. And Drew from the EPA will be here tomorrow. I mentioned talk to the town staff about these projects that are listed here and some of the ways that the town, that the EPA is going to be able to assist the town in some of the planning, identifying the planning that will go or that can go into the projects that are listed, everything from Times Square, stormwater, so beach land acquisitions, and then biking, walking, and paddle trail connectivity. The U.S. Department of Interior has been involved, and I know they've been reaching out to different groups around here. I know they recently reached out to the Estero Island Historical Society to look at an idea to kind of develop like a cultural tourism project. I think the Historical Society was looking into that, and so our contact with the DOI had been talking to them to see if there could be some teaming opportunity to bring in the DOI to assist. And then lastly is the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, or SRCAP. SRCAP is a group that's kind of based in, it started out in Virginia, but it has expanded into, I think, most states within the Southeast. There is an office of SRCAP up in Gainesville, but we've been in contact with them because, again, they have some means to assist with different areas, from providing GIS services, helping with different vulnerability assessments, depending on the extent of it, and then also the lead service line inventory was something that that's something that I think all the communities within the state will need to pull together by October, and that is something that they are able to help different communities, and I know that they're going to be, I think, assisting with some of the other communities that FEMA Community Assistance has been working with as well. And then lastly, next steps. So what's next? So we wrapped up, or we submitted the draft recovery plan. We will be finalizing that based on comments from the town, and we will submit that. In the end, this is it's a town's document. It's not going to be a FEMA. I mean, we helped prepare it, but it was prepared for the town, so it will be, the town can expand on it as they see fit. But again, the whole purpose of these recovery plans was to develop the plans for the towns. But yeah, so what's next? So we'll wrap up the plan. There's also some implementation projects that FEMA Community Assistance is looking to assist with. One is the stormwater capacity and reliability analysis. I know that was a big project, or a big need that was identified, and so we're looking at doing like a feasibility study to look at the stormwater capacity, and then also look at and then pull into that the canals as part of that feasibility. And then some other projects. Again, these aren't definite. They're just potential projects that we're looking into assisting. Second one is also doing a water systems capacity study, and then the third one is doing a solar power feasibility study. Again, a lot of these, actually, well, all three of these are really just feasibility studies, but it would be something that that we could do to help the town kind of move forward with some of these areas that they had identified was of interest. And that is it. I want to thank you for the invitation, for coming out today to present to you on I know what we've been doing. Again, we've been busy with the town. Again, going back to June of last year, and again, we're wrapping up the recovery plan, but now moving into assisting the town with some of these implementation projects. And with that, I will open up for questions.
Questions for Dan? Vice Mayor?
I just briefly wanted to get a takeaway. A lot of the public watches our hearings, and obviously the council's been wrestling with a lot of the issues that you addressed today in a comprehensive sense. But for those who are listening, for example, if there was a reporter sitting in the front room of the council meeting today, what's the takeaway? Did you find any revelation, any black swan moment, any sort of unique insight that we have not seen or that the town was not aware of? In other words, what's the news? I mean, it's great to have a great plan like this, but was there anything that you discovered that was really interesting or unique or insightful that you want to share that was sort of, I hate to use the word breaking news, but just something that was interesting or out of the ordinary that you would want to highlight?
Well, I mean, for me, it's looking at the projects that the town had identified, but then more so looking at the different funding opportunities that are out there to help the town. And it's, it may not be funding opportunities that's going to fund the entire project, but if there's something that a certain partner, whether it's EPA or SERCAP or the USDA, if they have, grant opportunities that are out there to help with these projects and help move them forward. That was, for me, that was really, it was really interesting for me to kind of see that, to see how these outside whether it's federal partners or, nonprofits or other groups that are out there, how they can assist the town with, and again, I mean, all these different projects that were identified are, projects that the town sees as something that they would like to have done to be able to move forward, post Ian.
But was there a specific project you said, aha, this is one that I know we can get funding for, this is one that's a home run, you've got to do it? Was there anything that just got you excited or out of the ordinary? Or
well, I think for me it was the I mean, it was good. I know the town received the funding from the state to do the stormwater and to do the to assist with the stormwater project, and hopefully with FEMA Community Assistance help, we'll be able to do the feasibility study to look at the stormwater capacity. So that I think that was really big because talking to Frankie and Andy and others in the town, that especially stormwater is a big concern for the town. And so being able to see ways that the town can find different sources for funding to help move that project, that particular project forward was really neat to see.
Okay, thank you very much.
John, any questions?
No, but I did like the fact that he used the University of Okoboji in his slide presentation.
Karen?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Scott?
Yep.
So most of these projects were 5 to 10 years, and most of them are around $10 million, give or take.
Right.
What would be your recommendation for us as a town to prioritize 1, 2, or 3? And I know Jim kind of brought it up. Let's say there was no funding. What projects would you think from doing this would be our most critical to get to focus on in the next year or two to get started? Or do you think that we should do all these?
Well, I think, looking at the list that was developed, you will see that a vast majority of the projects relate to infrastructure.
Right.
And so I think that is, and seeing, again, through our conversations with the town and hearing, what the town has in priority, that I think is where, a lot of the resources that the town is interested in looking for funding, other outside funding to try to help move those infrastructure projects forward. Not saying that the other ones are important, but that, when you, again, I would say 90% of the projects on that list are infrastructure related.
Right.
But again, that's where what's really interesting is in working with these other agencies like the EPA. So, there's the the beach restoration work, and if there's opportunities to, whether it's through the EPA or through the Army Corps of Engineers, to try to move that forward, or from the state, to be able to move that forward. So even though that may not fall under infrastructure, I mean, it's still a very important project, for the town is being able to restore the beaches and get them back to the conditions that they were. So again, I see infrastructure being a big item, but again, working with these other partners to see, okay, well, maybe the work with the Historical Society may not be a high priority, but if it's something that can get done by working with the assistance with Department of Interior or whatnot, again, if it's something that can be done with assistance from other team members, then I think that was really kind of a neat, for me, kind of a neat thing to see is how all these other groups out there can assist. But again, back to your question of what's a priority, what would be a priority for the town. Again, we're just looking at the number, based on the number of infrastructure related projects. That seems to be, that was a list the town had pulled together, and when I looked at that list and saw how many were infrastructure, the first thing to me was, okay, that's obviously a really important area that they want, that they need help with. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Dan, if I could.
Yes, sir.
On behalf of the staff, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank Daniel and his team. They tirelessly came here every week. We sat through a lot of meetings. We debated a lot of issues. At the end of the day, I think it was very worthwhile for staff and FEMA to participate in this. And I wholeheartedly want to give our thanks.
You stole my thunder, Frankie. I was going to do the same thing. No, that's all right. No, thanks, Dan, for all your hard work and a nice presentation that you had there. And the plan you put together, I think, working with the staff has really shown that a lot of hard work went into it. And I've been talking with these guys throughout the whole time. Although I wasn't in all your meetings, I was in a few. And it was a very daunting, very detailed task-orientated meeting. So thank you for all your hard work.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I think so.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Our next discussion is the LDC comp plan discussion regarding the land development code update proposal. Andy?
Yeah, Mayor, thank you so much. Council, Sarah had presented this to me back in February, and I wanted to get it before you guys today because obviously there's been some discussion about reviewing the land development code. And if you look at the scope of work, and it goes into, pretty much details everything that Axis would do for us, and reviewing that. And of course, there's public meetings that will be held. There's get back to that spot.
Hearings.
5 workshops, there's hearings, so it's very involved. And I think we're at a point where, staff, I would encourage you to seriously consider this. The cost is not as much as it could be in other areas. I've been $99,470, and that comes out of the building fund. So there's a dedicated source of money there for that. So Sarah's not here. We could call her if we need to, but I don't know if Frankie has anything to offer.
What kind of time frame were they thinking it would take to get through this? I know they've been working on it for quite a while.
They have, and I think that, to be totally honest with you, I can't give you a definite answer on that. I know that they've made a lot of progress and a lot of suggestive work. I don't think it would take long to wrap it up. I mean, we're talking within 6 months possibly.
Okay.
So is this 99,000 in addition to all the work that's already been done? Or how does that play out? Or is it 99,000 total?
From what I can tell, it's in addition to what's been done, but it could already be the fact that there's other work that's already been done that filters into this as well, not having been here the entire time they've been probably discussing this.
Yeah, these discussions, I mean, they've been going back. Scott can probably attest to it too through the LPA, I mean, for years. So I got to believe they understand, the things that needed now just implementing it.
I have a question. So this LDC change, this is going to be based on the comp plan. Once we get our comp plan revisions done, then they're going to work on the LDC.
Yes, sir. That's my understanding. Yes, sir.
Okay. So just so people watching understand, it's going to take a couple more months for us to get that comprehensive plan done. Then they work on the LDC. Then it goes to the state. So overall, right, we're in this process for a couple of years, but we're still looking at another year to everything gets codified. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So this is, how much are we talking about?
$99,470.
And is this for Sarah's firm? Is it for Eddie's firm?
I'm sorry. Yes, $99,470 it is for Axis, for Sarah's firm.
So, but none of this goes to Eddie's firm, who we've already had a contractual relationship with, correct?
This is just for Access that's doing the work.
Okay.
My understanding, Jim, this is for the LDC portion.
Right, not
Eddie's
the comp
doing
plan.
the comp plan.
I didn't know how much I just didn't want to continue to put money into Eddie's firm, given, I'm not going to say, but I'm glad it's going to Sarah's firm. Yep.
We understand.
All right.
John, you have any questions?
I do not. Thank
Are you
you.
just looking for direction from us to move forward with this?
Yes, sir. To include it on the next
Meeting?
council meeting.
Fine
Consent?
with-
Yeah.
Consent with me as well? You guys all right with it?
Yes.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Our next item is a proposed ordinance, expedited variance review. Nancy?
I don't know if it's worth it to read the title to it or not. I mean, this is not a public hearing on it, but the background of this is at your last meeting, you asked us to try to come up with a way that could expedite certain reviews that were going before the local planning agency, primarily for variances. And variances in situations where the vote by the local planning agency was unanimous. and why would there be a need for an additional meeting? However, there was discussion that said, well, maybe some issues came up at the local planning agency hearing that maybe did merit additional review. And so what we did was we took your code, we looked at your code, and it looks like it's section 34-232 that talks about the required hearings for various land development approvals. We added language regarding owner-initiated requests for variances, so I would like to just read that language. Owner-initiated requests for variances that are unanimously approved by the local planning agency, and there is no request for an additional public hearing before the town council made by anyone that is received by the town clerk within 10 calendar days after the date of the local planning agency decision, excluding holidays, only require one public hearing before the local planning agency. And the local planning agency decision is final agency action. Those are key words, final agency action. That is basically their ticket to go to court to challenge any type of final approval. And the language continues, other owner-initiated requests for variances require public hearings first by the local planning agency and then by the town council. So we were very narrow and specific as to what our direction was.
If I could just set the table on this just a little bit, Nancy. Thank you for your efforts. I heard a little colloquy at the last LPA meeting between the chair and I think it was Patrick, and the chair was inquiring as to what we were doing here, and I think Patrick said this is to make our meetings go faster. That is a byproduct of what we're doing here. But what I'm trying to accomplish, and have been trying for a number of years now, is to create a dynamic where, for example, at the last council meeting on Monday, we had 2 hearings after an extremely long hearing on an elevated pool, where one of our residents had to sit here for a good 2 hours, as we all did, to enjoy the discussion of the elevated pool. But 2 hours she had to spend to come before us after she already received a unanimous a vote from the LPA on her, because her pool equipment was put on the wrong side of her pool. The LPA very appropriately handled that, but she had to wait 2 hours to have her case be heard. Second case we heard was we actually had the architect sat here for the initial hearing, again 2 hours. Land planner who they'd hired sat here for 2 hours. This is a cumbersome process. There was no issues when these issues came before the council. So this is not only to expedite our meetings, but also to make it easier for the residents just to procedurally come before the council when they need some assistance. And again, it's not meant to in any way inhibit anyone who's remonstrating in any way. That's why I think the language is very clever the way you did it, Nancy. So anyone has the opportunity to call for a hearing, not just members of the council, but anyone from the public. Because sometimes the LPA will draw attention to an issue that may sail through, but later people realize, oh my goodness, I had no idea this was going on. Then they want to have their voice be heard. They'll have that opportunity. I had just a couple questions in your language on page 92. On the bottom of the page, there's item B, owner-initiated requests for rezoning, and then you strike the word variances. And I was curious why you did that. And then on the next page, you have, for the language you just read, you said owner-initiated requests for variances. And did you mean to say rezonings? Or
No, so the answer to your first question was the first part of the paragraph, B, talks about owner-initiated requests for rezoning, special exceptions, and developments. And then the sentence continues to say that there is one public hearing before the local planning agency, and then one public hearing before the town council. When you go to the added language, this is specific for variances. And that specific language says possibly one if
Gotcha.
there's no objection
So
to it.
rezonings would not be covered by this clause, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then, for example, we obviously have some huge projects coming up in the form of a commercial plan development. Those would not be obviously covered by this as well, correct?
Correct. This is limited only to variances.
And when you say other owner-initiated requests for variances requires public hearings, first by the local planning agency and then by the town council, could you give a couple examples of what those might be?
That is going to be a situation where there is an objection that is raised.
Okay, so that's just clarifying
The
items
prior.
that would be objected to and
Yes.
wanting and requesting. My question to you is, at the LPA hearing, you have a very appropriately regimented process where you actually have a script. Could we have this language built into the script? So in other words, when a variance passes, an owner-initiated variance passes unanimously from the LPA, could that be part of the script so that anybody who's watching or present realizes they have the opportunity to go and request?
Yes. In fact, I believe on the agenda itself, there is a notation regarding appeals, and we can put it in there as well as the announcement.
Yeah, I think it'd be important to
Yeah.
announce it at the meeting. That way, if
Announce
anybody's watching and says, oh my goodness, I had no idea this was going on, and they'll have the ability to call the town clerk and then
Yes.
request for that
From a
hearing.
policy perspective, is the 10-day period sufficient for you?
I think that works.
Okay.
Should
It's
it be
calendar.
10 business days, Jim?
It says 10 calendar days.
You okay with calendar?
Excluding holidays.
I could go either way, Scott, whatever you think.
I think I'd prefer business just because,
It's business.
Yeah, I actually.
yeah, because the staff is here.
That's fine.
You know,
To
if
answer
it's a 3-day
questions or
weekend or
anything.
something, then
Yeah.
the other question I had is with that last line that Jim was referring to, other owner initiated, would it make more sense to change that wording to be, if there's been a request for additional? I
we
think
can work on
it sounds confusing when you
It is
say other,
confusing. It is confusing.
other, but I think if you're saying that line refers specifically to, I don't want to use the word challenge, but someone wants to have another hearing,
We could say if no request is made or something like that. Or if a request is made, I'm sorry.
yes, if a
Yeah.
request is made for an owner initiated variance, something along those lines.
And this, I know it says owner initiated, but this is strictly for residential, not commercial.
I don't think that distinction is made. So it is owner.
So it's owner, so it could be
It could be
on
commercial.
either side of things. Okay.
Johnny, got any
I'm good.
other questions for Nancy?
No, I think the next step would be, with council's direction, is to go ahead and start taking this to the LPA and see how they feel about it. And then it would come back to you in the form of an ordinance change, which would be 2 public hearings to actually adopt it. And I have to say, I'm not the clever one. It's Becky. She came up with the language, so I wanted to recognize that.
Well, I appreciate your efforts. I think it's excellent work, and I think this will really help us. It's not going to solve all the world's problems, but anything we can do to expedite it, not only for the council, but more importantly for our residents, I think is a positive step forward.
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak out of line, but I think you got full council support to move forward with.
Okay, we will do it.
So
All right.
I just have a question though on going back to what Jim was saying about, we had this really, really long hearing for 2 hours and then these other people had to wait. Is there a way, and I guess it's like trying to read the crystal ball, like how long these things are going to take, but is there a way to look at the order of things, knowing that some are going to take longer than others and some are just going to go right through so that we don't have to run into that?
Could you maybe prioritize the unanimous votes from the LPA?
Well, I think a lot of times when you have a big hearing like we had, they have more attorneys, they have more people involved, so there's, 80% of the room is there for that.
So it's going to take longer.
But
no matter
I
what.
think I think they usually do those big ones first because there's so many people involved. And I guess the theory is you're not letting them wait for the other ones. I don't know. It's hard to But I think doing this, I think you're going to get the ones that are, layups or slam dunks. I think you're going to get those off of our agendas. So there's
So
not,
we don't have 'em.
so we don't have those. But
I'm gonna try it.
maybe we could try it.
Yeah, but then I think if the ones that do come through because someone maybe does challenge or want to have additional public hearings, is it possible to rank or put them in order of if it was
So-
unanimous vote? So using those from Monday, in that case, the ones would have been at the top that,
Yes.
And
So I think some of that is dependent on the timing of getting the agenda out and not knowing, within that
got it,
10-day
yeah.
period. However, you do have the
Documentation.
option at the beginning of your meeting on setting the agenda. You can switch the order. At that point, we would know who is physically present and maybe expedite it.
Well,
Yeah.
you kind of get, by the emails and the phone calls, you kind of get an idea what's going to take longer. So I think, if we leave it up to ourselves to figure that out, I think that might be the most efficient way.
works for me.
Okay, I have my direction. Thank you.
You got it. Our next item, our final item, is reviewing ordinance 2305, temporary housing, temporary governmental use facilities in the specified zoning districts. Who wants to start this one?
I can start it.
Okay, go ahead,
So there was
Nancy.
discussion at the last meeting, some concerns raised about a commercial use that was transpiring at Town Square. And so there was a look at the ordinance that was adopted back in March of 2023, looking specifically at the language in it. And it was identified that there was ambiguity and some confusion. And so this item was brought back to you for further discussion and direction as far as perhaps the need to clarify what was previously approved by council.
Yeah, I think there was, we went back and forth over some things, and I think, Jim, you have the same recollection I do that, and maybe Karen and John do as well, that not everything that was discussed seemed to make its way into the ordinance. And it made it kind of a little messy. So how do we clean it up? Again, I said it on Monday, I think my recollection of the initial conversation was the intent was to allow commercial landowners to operate a commercial business. Now, there was talk about first right of refusal to the business that was there, because we wanted the businesses that were on the island back to give them a space. Obviously, some did come back, some did not. And I think it has kind of morphed into, there's still commercial businesses being operated on these commercial properties, but it seems to have sparked is that the way we want to go? Is that the direction that the town wants, is to just let anybody come and set up shop on any commercial? I don't know that was the intent, but watching Monday's meeting again, there was some things that, I guess if I have a property that was a T-shirt shop and that said T-shirt shop doesn't want to come back, but now maybe a shoe store does, do we have really an issue with, something like that, a similar use being used? Or do we just want to go down the road of it is what it is? I kind of know where I stand on that, but I'd like to hear from everyone else what they think as far as we can get down the road to timeframes and that. But I think starting with what use is on the property and what commercial versus residential, and go down that road first. If that makes any sense to anyone.
So do you think we should handle residential first?
I think that's the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the intent for that was to allow those that were, time to get through. And we originally, I believe it was 6 months, and we would review it every 6 months with up to 18 months, and then a chance to potentially extend it depending on where we were at. Right up the storm, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we hadn't determined how much damage there was yet. There were so many unknowns. Then fast forward June and July, they passed Senate Bill 250, which superseded the intent and what we had said in regards to the commercial or to the residential. Basically saying they've got 36 months to figure it out. I think even 19 months from now, there might be some people that I guess what I don't want to do is I don't want someone that has a permit in, they're waiting for their pilings to come in at 36 months because they just got their design done, to say, oh, it's been 36, you know, it's been 36 months, you got to get your trailer off your property, you know? I don't think that's the intent or that's the will of anyone. So how do we put that in wording to be able to, I think it's important that they have to at least have a process started. I think after 36 months residentially, if you haven't made any steps forward or had any conversation with the town or did anything, that's a different story than someone that's trying to elevate their house or they're trying to, because there's people waiting to elevate their house, but they can't do anything until they get the okay from the federal government to do it. So
Right.
Well, not only that, but most of the people that lift the house, having gone through this, there's a year wait right now.
Exactly.
So if you sign up in 6 months, you're probably going to be past that 36 months.
Right.
But I think we all agree that if people haven't started the process, haven't come to the town and say, hey, this is what I want to do, at least had a introductory meeting with Frankie's team and hey, this is our plans, what are next steps? But I think we want to eliminate just the people that aren't doing anything.
Right.
And, 3 years is plenty of time. I'm sorry, but you've got to have a plan. You may not, and I think it'll add some certainty to the market where they know they have to get moving. I think you just don't give them a hammock. You've got to give them a trampoline to bounce up and do something.
yeah, it's definitely not a fun thing to have to do, but at some point you have to do it. Just like, go ahead, Frankie.
I was just going to interject something, Mr. Mayor. We had a phone call late yesterday afternoon with our representatives of Tidal Basin who are putting together a state document for mitigation. And this revolves around the people that are elevating, that are in that elevation program. That's still in the stage of discussion. So these people earnestly signed up for these things right after Ian. And here we are 18 months to your edict. And they're still discussing how the path to move forward. So there hasn't been any final determination for these people's world, basically. It's still in FEMA's or the state's hands to pass judgment on clarifying language between the two. So to your point, how do you slam the door?
Are the people that are waiting, in this case, Frankie, are people that are waiting, are they still coming in to apply for their permit?
No,
Or they're
sir,
waiting?
that stopped as of May 31st last year. But what we do have, finally, we were able to get the names and addresses, potentially, not yet, released from FEMA of those people that are in that mitigation program. So we can reach out as a town and start working with them to see what they will need from the town. I think that's more important to us as staff, knowing that these places, that they have made contact. They may not be on the island in a trailer. They may not be in the area. But if we can reach out and let them know that, hey, we're understanding that they're in this program, and we can have that two-lane of communication, I think that'll go to what Councilman Scott said earlier as well.
Yeah, and we're not making people. You have to look at it. This is just about trailers on the property. It's not. You have to make a decision to do something on your property. You have that choice to leave it vacant or sell it, but we're just talking about the trailers.
Exactly.
So I think we need to, and I think you just by the trailer permits, your staff can narrow it down to see where they are and maybe even reach out and say, hey, we're going to have a drop dead date or whatever, and what do you have a plan? Do you need help? What can we do? And then start that conversation now. And we've given them 18 months to help them come to a decision.
I think that, and they're still requiring a renewal every 6 months, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Maybe on that renewal, get something out right away, but then also a reminder when they come in for their renewal, they get a letter that says, just so that you know, this is, September 28th, 2025 is the deadline to make some progress, whether, we have the proof that they're in a mitigation program and that hopefully it has started by then, but if it hasn't, we know that they're trying to do something. It's not them holding up the issue.
Correct, sir. And as far as the mitigation program, it's just going to be a small handful. It's not any big number that we're talking about. So that can be easily traced and tracked down. But to your point, yes, we'll definitely get something going.
And
So I just
Go
have
ahead.
one question, though. Like we said, make a decision to build or sell or whatever. So they've reached the deadline date, and now they've decided to put their property up for sale. Do they still keep their trailer on their property till it sells? No. Good. All right. That's what I want to know, because there could be all kinds of shenanigans with that. So that deadline, unless you are rebuilding or have something in process, whatever, you're off. And if you sell, you're off the lot.
Nancy, it looks like you're taking a lot of notes. Are you catching all this?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
I was just going to ask Nancy, I think this is a very good discussion, but Nancy, is there a way to codify this?
Oh, absolutely. You're going to be putting that into your ordinance. This will come back to you with an ordinance change.
But what's the language, though? Are we saying, I mean, obviously, we've got the elevation issue. That's an easy one to discern. But there are people with insurance, contractor issues, supply chain issues. Do they need to somehow demonstrate that they're working in good faith? I mean, what's the language that you put in? How do
Yes, I think I would start maybe with extenuating circumstances, and then go from there. And I think your code already does give some examples. I guess it's on page 4 of the ordinance. It says the town manager may consider whether the applicant has had difficulties in completing insurance claims, obtaining an architect, engineer, obtaining construction materials, obtaining a contractor, and if relevant, whether they have had difficulty in obtaining grants or loans to assist in repair. I think those are good examples of what extenuating circumstances might be, but, they could also be caught up in litigation, too.
Yep. I just want to make sure that the town manager and staff have the ability to serve as that safety valve for those folks who are truly hurting and trying, but they're hurting, and they got for a variety of challenges. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I think the intent here is to weed out those that are really don't want to do anything.
In the hammock?
In a hammock.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, no more hammocks.
No more hammocks. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add to the
Residential.
residentials? Now, I've heard that there is talk of potentially extending Senate Bill 250. So far, it hasn't come up, but in that case, we'd be right back here in the same situation if they were to extend it. That was talk several months ago, but it seems to have died down.
Well, do we put something in there that if
In accordance
In
with
a-
state law.
Yeah, something
right
like
accordance
that.
with state law?
Yeah.
So if they extended a year, then
Yep.
I'd be fine with that if that,
I mean, there's nothing we can do if we
Right.
do.
Right.
yeah.
So we just cover ourselves with it.
I think the basis here is that we really want to urge people to come in and talk to staff. And the more you let staff know where you're at, the easier it is for them to help, I don't want to say defend, but make people understand if they do send in emails or they do call, we can say, hey, Andy, Frankie, what's going on with this property? And they can say, da-da-da, here you go, this is why. And then we can let people know that maybe have an issue with why there might still be a trailer there. Okay. Let's get to commercial.
This is the fun one.
Who wants to start this one? I guess I'd like to just hear from everyone up here that, their thoughts. We all were at the meeting on Monday. We heard what the chair, Anita, said, and we heard kind of the back and forth. So I guess I just getting everybody's 2 cents to help kind of start the conversation to see where we end up might be beneficial. You want to start us
Oh, you're
out,
looking
Scott?
at me?
Well, you look like you're ready to go, so.
Well, I think there are two issues. Number one, it's the the businesses like the Beach Bar that own the property. They're committed to building back, but then you've got a subsection of people like Moms and Mojos that are at the mercy of the owner. So I think it's pretty easy for the Whale and Beach Bar and establishments like that have put their business back. They're in the process of building. And then you've got this subset of businesses, and you've got the island residents that want and need businesses to come back. But how do we protect the moms of the world where you don't know what the owner's going to do? I mean, do we kind of put it in the same category, the subcategory of just like the resident that's waiting on insurance, waiting on litigation? I mean, they're held up. So to tell Mom or to tell Brian down at Mojo's, hey, you got a drop dead date. They don't own the building. So that's really tough. That's the one I think we're going to have to really wrestle with it. And then do we set up a zone, whether it be Times Square or Santini, where you have like the kind of the place where these businesses are allowed? And it helps the island, it helps these small businesses see if they can get a new start. Because I think we can all agree that the businesses that have stepped up and opened up shop are committed to being here to stay. But we need more services and amenities on the island, and how do we handle that? So it's
Yeah, I've tried to like compartmentalize it as far as categories based on like what you said. We'll use the beach bar. It's a landowner that's operating their own business. They're in control of exactly what they're doing, so no one else is going to be coming there. Then you've got properties in Times Square that are owned by someone else that are operating a business that was there before in some cases. And maybe there's a different business from the island that's operating on a property that they don't own. How do you address those? That's a different category for me versus, and then you get to the other one where it's, it's very difficult because you're going to have landowners that, as long as they can have a food truck there and they're getting the rent that they want to get, they're in no rush, I would think, to want to build a brick and mortar. So to me, that's kind of the crux of the issue of how do you tackle that? I mean, I think Anita had a very good point. You look at places, what does the town want Times Square to look like? We don't have control over it. We don't own the land, but people like food trucks there. I mean, they seem to, but people also like a place. It hasn't been 95 degrees and 100% humidity yet either, so having air conditioning might be helpful. But I don't know that I'm in favor either of putting a hard deadline stop date on having a business. You can't, to your point, moms, you got to get your trailer off the parking lot. You know what I mean? But how do you, similar to the residential, how do we find out what the intent is of the landowner, the commercial landowner? How do we, I don't know. I'm just adding on top of what you said.
I think the developmental agreements, knock on wood, if we can come to some compromise on that, I think that'll speed up some of the smaller lots so they can make a decision and some clarity and give them a path forward. But I think the fear is of just the proliferation on just all these lots of just another food truck, which isn't bad, but when does it end? And what are you opening? You're opening the floodgates. I'm not against food trucks. I think they've been fantastic, and I just think we have to, as a town, have a clear vision of, do we set up an area just for the food trucks? Maybe, we're mid-island somewhere where there's some empty land, or Santini Plaza. I mean,
Maybe that's a use for town hall property for now.
or a town hall property.
Something that's not in the area that would, directly interfere with a brick and mortar that's across the street.
Right. Because we don't want to, when government gets involved in prohibiting businesses, you're giving an advantage to the guy that's here. And fair enough. I mean, they needed an advantage the first 18 months, but you're going to let the market decide, pricing, products, everything else. So we want to do the most we can to create a free market, but there's got to be a little bit of boundaries there.
Yeah, well, let's start and get one thing off the table potentially. Is anyone up here in favor of a hard deadline of this is the end date where you can no longer have a portable business on your commercial property? Is anyone in favor of doing that?
To borrow one of your phrases, to play the devil's advocate, why can't we just set it up like we just did for residences, and then with extenuating circumstances, revisit it?
Well, that's a good question. That's the other side of the coin.
SB 250 just was for residential, correct? It did not cover commercial at all?
Yeah, for the most part.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and I go, were you finished with what you were talking about?
I've said enough.
Scott?
Go ahead, Karen. Run with it.
So in my book, I mean, my mind preference is to the businesses that were here before the storm. And I would give all kinds of exceptions for them, especially if they, like Times Square, for example, they don't own the property necessarily. Some of them do, but most don't. They were businesses that were here before. They are trying to see what they can do. You know, the whole Times Square group is working somewhat together. I don't know how much together, but they're working to figure this out. But and I had the biggest issue with businesses that were not here before the storm and coming in and renting property in prime areas that were never part of that business there before. So if you take Sunsets, you know, Sunsets was a restaurant. There's no food truck to set up for Sunsets per se. If there was a food truck that he was interested in renting to, I could go more along the line of that. But a totally unknown business to come in, I have a problem with that. I look at the Whale. You know, the Whale is rebuilding. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. They're moving forward, but their food trucks operate as their kitchen. And they're giving variety to people, so there's new food trucks that come in, but it's an existing business and they're operating as the kitchen. So I actually kind of really like the idea of setting up a separate area for food trucks that are new to the island. Maybe we want to, that's our testing ground. Are they going to be successful? Are they not? Food truck courts are huge, and they're becoming more and more huge. People love them. So that could be a testing ground for now, and we, you know, maybe we do it 6 months to a year at a time or put deadlines on it until we really figure out what we're going to do with property and planning of the island. So, but I think the preference has to be made to businesses that were here before the storm and want to build back.
Yeah, you know, I think that kind of went into two things. You talked about there's an ordinance that doesn't allow mobile vendors or food trucks on the island. So your point, maybe that we look at that at a different time to say, is that something that we want to potentially make allowable use? And you got to change. That's one of the things that you could change with the times. Anybody that's been to Backyard Social knows how successful that place is. It's all the time. I mean, people love to go there. It's a great concept. You know, people talk to each other. So it's really cool. But, you know, you talked about Sunset Grill, and that's essentially what sparked this whole conversation, or has accelerated, I guess. I look at it from, if I'm the landowner going back to the beach bar, if the beach bar decided they didn't want to be a beach bar until they start building their building and they wanted to have, I don't know, Jerry's Sunglass Hut there, would we have a problem with that? Because that wasn't what was there before. So I try to look at it as, you know, I think we've all been very fair with trying to work with people to help them get back on their feet. And are we saying then, if you own the land, but you're choosing not to open the business that you also owned there because you can make more rent from somebody that's willing to run a t-shirt shop or run a, do we really want to get involved in telling them how to operate their property and their business? Or do we want to say, you can do that, but there's a timeline on it. You're not going to be able to do that forever. You're not. So Beach Bar has chosen to do what they did before. Terry has chosen to not do what he did before. Whether you love it or hate it, does the government really want to get involved in telling? Because what if he says, I'm going to build back a t-shirt shop here instead? Or like I said to Anita on Monday, or he buys the business that's sitting there. Would we have a problem with it then? But I think we all want to have the business that was there before, but not every business can come back or wants to come back.
Yeah.
So I have a problem with telling a landowner that spent a lot of money and pays a lot of taxes that they can't run a commercial business that is legal and is allowable,
Well, yeah,
whether you like it or not.
That's the other point where you get into government overreach, and you're suppressing the market. You're not so much protecting the other business, but when a government starts to disallow entry into a market, you're raising prices, you're hampering unemployment, you're doing a lot of things that you really don't intend to do, but those are things that happen. And there may be this new business that wants to try it out, and they become successful and they want to open up shop here. You know, I think a lot of people say, oh, there's just vultures coming in. Well, you know, they're not. They're business people, and they're trying to make a living, and they might hit something that works, and they start employing people. They come up with a great idea, and they may become members of the community. I think the market's going to bear, based on the occupancy of the hotels and the vacation rentals and the amount of tourists and, you know, an increase of people moving back to the island, there's going to be more goods and services needed. So I think when government overreaches and prohibits that, I think you're running a really slippery slope there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see everybody's emails, but I can tell you how many complaints I've gotten since the storm for these temporary food trucks or these temporary uses, and the number is 0. I've not had one complaint until this one truck showed up, and now.
Yeah, but again, whether you like it or not, Dan, or Mr. Mayor, sorry,
I answer to both, doesn't matter.
you've got to realize that if they could have opened up a voodoo shop, who knows, and somebody doesn't like it, but the market's going to weed
Sure.
those guys out. I mean, it's going to be market driven, right? So if you don't like it, don't buy from them. Don't have it's just one of those things. But if they're successful, then there's a market for it.
Yeah, and we've heard a lot of talk about, one of the things that all of us have said that we love about this island is it's fun, it's funky, it's eclectic. It's, to me, those things are fun, funky, and eclectic. It's like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth with this issue. We want people to build back. We want them to be successful, but we don't want to budge on certain things, but we don't want to keep the trailers. And I don't know how you can do both. Eventually, it's going to get there. Eventually, as you said, the market's going to dictate. If you're going to try to run your trailer and the two people on either side of you build a brick and mortar and you're sitting there empty in July 5th or July 4th when it's 95 degrees and 100% humidity because they have air conditioning, it's going to make you rethink.
Yeah, there's more to business than just throwing up a t-shirt shop. I mean,
Sure.
there's a social media component, there's the advertising, there's how you participate in the community. I mean, the people that do well with social media and that sponsor the Little League teams and do stuff like that, more and more people are going to support them. Whereas these guys just come in and open up a stand. Yeah, they may make some money in season, but they're going to be gone. I mean, it's just, again, it's not just your product, it's your overall
Involvement.
involvement.
Vice
Okay,
Mayor?
can I be more devil's advocate just
Go
one
ahead.
second?
Sure. Yeah.
So, all right, we talk about the people who are renting, per se, they didn't own the land or anything like that. So where are we on, the same as we're pushing residential to have a plan and that type of thing, where are we on pushing businesses to have a plan, like the area that Mom's is in, like the area that, what's the one across the street? Heavenly Biscuit, thank you. I mean, they had a building, what's happening in those areas? Are we pushing them as well? Times Square. I mean, what is happening with Times Square? I mean, I know kind of what's happening, but are we pushing that for development as well as residential? I think we should be.
Yeah. I don't think anybody wants to see trailers forever, but
No.
I think, let's finish hearing from Vice Mayor Adderholt.
Well, it's a great discussion. I wish I had all the answers on this one because I've heard from a lot of constituents and there's a wide variety of opinion on this issue. At some point, I'm interested to hear from our attorney and also our town manager and director of operations because they're going to have to enforce this, and we have to be cognizant of what we can and can't do and what our boundaries are, because I assume this would be ripe for litigation if we're discriminatory in any particular way. And I think to Karen's point, what's the what's the sentiment and what are the incentives to drive folks towards a brick and mortar solution? I've had some people say, "Oh, I love the mobile businesses. That's fine. They'll be fine if they're here forever." I have another significant part of the constituency that says we want to incent and encourage brick and mortar. We don't want trailers here long term. It's a community discussion that I think is important and has to be ongoing. And if we do decide that long-term brick and mortar is desirable, do we then allow for an outlet such as a food court for food trucks? Like I think the town hall property would be an interesting location. It wouldn't directly compete with anyone, and it would be interesting to see how that fares in the off season. I think we need to remember what the off season was like last summer. It was brutal here. It was like a desert, and that's going to be the ultimate test of the entrepreneur, is who can survive the off season here on Fort Myers Beach, particularly as we're rebuilding. And for those who can tough it out through this summer and this fall, God bless them. We welcome them, because it was pretty grim here last summer. Obviously, things are getting better, but I don't know that there's an easy answer. But I do think if there's a policy goal of trying to incent brick and mortar, we need to be cognizant of policies that drive us in that direction. It may be premature at this point because we're still sorting things out. We have a lot of unknowns with Times Square. We have a lot of unknowns with Kia Stero. We have unknowns with Seagrape Plaza. Santini Plaza, I think, is starting to come around and come into is getting into a little bit of a more appropriate timeline where we can measure results. But we don't have a lot of places for businesses to go right now. Meyer site will be before us soon. They've put out some potential options for retail. But this is a broader discussion, because if we're going to push towards brick and mortar, we're currently in negotiations with the Kia Stero owner, who also owns Seagrape. Maybe part of that negotiation is getting them off their tail and starting to get them to renovate their property so we can have an incubator for some of these small businesses that we so desperately need. You know, if somebody wants to come in with a trailer and cut hair, and they park somewhere on the island, you can't get a haircut on the island unless you go to Margaritaville. It's a lovely place, but it's also very expensive. So, I mean, it also helps solve the traffic problems. In other words, if a business comes to Fort Myers Beach that's a new business but meets a need, do we want to disincent that business? And that's a challenge. You know, if that haircutting place parks down at the south end of the island, or even in Mid-Island, there's a lot of folks that need to get their hair cut, men and women, who are driving off island right now. If, let's say, somebody wants to do a medical truck, like an immediate care or some kind of a clinic, a mobile clinic, we certainly wouldn't want to discourage that. So, I mean, I'm raising more issues than I am in terms of solutions, because it is challenging. But if we are, these are important things to talk about and think about, because long term, I'm a big market-driven person. I like to let the market work. But if we have particular goals like brick and mortar, we need to kind of build into our incentive system a way to encourage that, and maybe having a separate area for food trucks, for new food trucks. Maybe that's the compromise. I'm just thinking out loud.
John?
I kind of am all over the place, honestly. I grew up in a brick and mortar donut shop for over 50 years, so that's where my heart lies. But I understand the other side of the issue. The concern I have, though, and Scott, one of my favorite taco places in Des Moines, Iowa, went out of business because of food trucks, because they're not having to pay the taxes they'd set up in somebody's parking lot and didn't have to pay the taxes that a brick and mortar person did. Now, if we do that with Town Hall, how does that break down? Does that give them an unfair advantage over a brick and mortar because there's no property taxes there for them to pay? That's a concern.
Yeah, you know,
Bring the tacos into it.
yeah, now everybody's
Just want to
hungry.
make sure you're awake at the other end.
Scott's going to have to recuse himself now at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. Now he's torn between donuts and tacos.
Well, I think you've got a great point there, John, but I think once summer comes, most of my guests that come down here are like, where's an air conditioned place I can eat, or where's some place on the water where I've got some breeze. It's, the summers down here, as Jim said, are brutal, especially for consumers. I mean, you're probably going to get the construction workers or guys, working, running down there and grabbing a couple tacos, but the families spending the money and want to go have a beer with their tacos or whatever are going to probably go to a brick and mortar with air conditioning. But it's not there's not just a one-stop solution for this. I mean, it's going to be a challenge for us.
Yeah, I mean, you just looking at Times Square, how do you with so many different business owners there, to build something individual of someone else, to me, I think is going to be very, very difficult. Even if you were allowed to do more than what they could do, it's going to still be extremely difficult to do. That's why they're working on what they're working on. But when you look at other areas, I look at places like Old San Carlos, where you got one business that hasn't touched their building. I mean, we had to go put fencing up around it. They refused to do anything. We're getting that taken care of. Right next to it, you got someone that's fighting for their livelihood, just trying to sling beers and try to keep themselves afloat. It's two different things, but how do you? It's not easy to navigate through that. And then you've got someone like Tom in Times Square who's set up, and it leads me to ask you, Nancy. Just using Tom's because it's everybody's seen and heard it. FEMA had a very big issue with temporary stuff being there. Of all of the things that are in Times Square, his is probably the least mobile, if you will, or the quickest to move. And is FEMA going to look down at us and say, you can't do this forever? Because I can tell you, in having meetings with them, they're here. These guys know it. They're here every day, and they're looking at it, and they're not going to let this go on forever. They're not going to let you, because what happens, it's inherent. You start with a food truck, and then all of a sudden you see a palapa, and all of a sudden you see something that's hard connected. It's not a quick connect, and it just morphs into something which is cool and it's funky and it's vibey. But the people that come in to help us when there's a disaster don't like that stuff. So they're, at some point they can just look at us and say, you're not doing what we think you should do, and you're not going to be in the flood insurance program. So legally, how do we navigate through that? How do you?
I don't have the answer for you right
Yeah.
off the top, but it is a good issue. And we'll have to go back and look at what FEMA regulations and requirements are and how they may react to something like that. I think if you have checks and balances on what you're actually permitting, perhaps periodic reviews, that might be more indicative that FEMA may be in agreement with the policy of the town to monitor and to try to get to the ultimate use that would be permitted, as opposed to having something temporary that just continues to morph.
And the further we get away from the storm, the quicker we're going to get to no longer a state of emergency. I think they just extended the state 30 days or something. So that's going to run out at some point. Is a easy solution at this point, if someone is good, that's going to be a new vendor that comes in potentially to be on a temporary site, if that business conflicts with any other ordinances, that they have to come through the process, as opposed to just, here's your temporary permit, you can set it up because that's the way it's set up. Does it make sense to say, this business that you want to set up conflicts with this, and this ordinance, so we're not just going to give it to you. You have to come through and get a special exception just like anyone else would. I don't know if that's the answer to try to alleviate some of the fear that, as you said, Jim, people don't want to see just anything being set up anywhere all the time. I don't know if that's
But going to the special exception, that is more of a permanent nature, whereas this is more just a temporary use.
well, I just use that as
I
the
know,
wording.
but in my mind, there's a little bit of a distinction, because when you start talking about special exception, that's much more permanent.
Well, when eventually the state of emergency goes away, which it will, I think that's some of the temporary uses, I would think, would be much more difficult
To get.
to get.
Because the rationale is not there as to why you would require it.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody was tracking that, but at some point, some of the things that had to do over the last 18, 19 months, they're going to have to go back to the way that they have to be done. And
So does that give FEMA more ability to shut down things on say, Times Square, for example, or anywhere on the beach because we are no longer in a state of emergency?
well, FEMA doesn't shut anything down. They just come in and say, you guys aren't, well, what they can say is, your ordinance says that you've got an ordinance that you're outside of the state of emergency, and I'm just speculating, but I would think they could say, you're no longer in that state of emergency. You have an ordinance that was in place pre-storm that says you don't allow mobile food trucks. Why are you still allowing mobile food trucks? Just like they do with the houses. You can't build something back. You have to follow the ordinances that you had in place. We went through this issue when it was people that had lower units that they could show were permitted lower units, and they can't have it back. We had to go through a big fight to say they can prove it. And in our ordinance, we were able to use our ordinance to help defend our residents by saying it says there's 10 things that they can show. We only require that they show 3 of them, of those, so we were able to get around it that way. I don't know that we'll be able to do that with FEMA, with the temporary trailers. And so I think that might be something to look at from your legal side to see where we certainly don't want to do anything that we're not supposed to be doing. I just think, how much are we're going to lose a lot of things that we've been able to do over the last 16 months when that state of emergency ends. So let's kind of get back to where we circle around. I guess, some people are for, some people are against putting a hard deadline on when you have this allowable use. I think what you're going to work on, Nancy, will help alleviate some of that discussion potentially.
As far as the FEMA discussion?
Well, as far as a
The others.
timeline.
The timeline for, I was still in the bucket phase. Are we going back there?
We can start, let's go back there.
That was very
You're the one taking all the
organized.
notes.
Yes. So from a policy perspective, then, businesses that, property owners that own the land and have a business, what is the direction? I think Beach Bar was given as an example. Should they be, should we expand what is currently in the code to go into the commercial areas and provide a mechanism to give a temporary use permit to those type of businesses as we do with residential, having the same checks and balance,
And the same deadlines.
the same deadlines, very similar. That would be the first bucket. I'm the property owner. I had a restaurant. I want to put a temporary food truck or some type of restaurant use.
We've already determined that the people that are here have already done that. Do you know of is there an example out there where somebody now, 18 months later after season, decides they want to open up something? I just don't know.
You mean temporary or hard?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, what sparked this whole thing.
Well, no. I'm talking a property owner that wants to bring his business back now after 18 months.
Well, I think,
I think there's a lot that are trying to.
yeah, that want to, it's just a matter of,
Do you have an example? I'm not.
well, I think all of Times Square,
Okay, Times Square.
they want to, Beach Bar, they're
Right, but
moving on.
they've already opened. Is there
Right.
somebody out there that hasn't opened yet that's
Yeah.
going to open?
John Richard.
We don't know.
I mean, John's got multiple properties on Old San Carlos, and I know Shipwreck is opening in phases, but I don't know what's happening across the street with what used to be
Felipe's.
Felipe's and that restaurant or anything like that, or where the Ocean, whatever that other restaurant on the other side.
I think his goal is to
Ocean
open the brick
Jewel.
and mortar.
Mhm.
He's demonstrated that with Shipwreck.
With Shipwreck.
He's getting that brick and mortar. I'm talking about, does somebody want to set up a mobile trailer out, like,
I would think if they would do it, if they could have, they would have done it already. If they
that's what I'm
were to-
saying. I mean, I can't think.
Just
of
use Hooters, the Hooters property.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, Hooters is, well, it'll be, I mean, yeah, so,
you know,
do you, that's an owner, then,
Hooters or Hoosiers or any, I mean, well, Hoosiers is up for sale, that whole building.
well, they didn't own that,
has to
but
come
yeah.
down.
yeah, they didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't own it, they rented. Yeah.
Well, and I think that we just opened it up in a, so do we, maybe they have intent to build a building and they're going through the design phase, but they want to come in and set up a taco trailer while they're waiting for the design to start. Do you tell them now, no, you can't do that?
I didn't say that.
No, I know. I'm just asking the question.
Asking who's out there that is going to be in that position. I mean, we're going to set a policy that doesn't affect anyone.
Well, I
Right.
think we're kind of getting further and further away of what the initial discussion was about, is how long my understanding was, how long are we going to allow this temporary use? Is it going to be indefinite?
Well,
I don't think
I
so.
think with, with the beach bar and with the whale and those businesses, I mean, again,
Well, we know
if they're
what they
showing a will to rebuild, then just like the homeowner, you- they've got plans, they've put in for permits, they've had discussions with the town. Town understands what they're going through, if they're working on a developmental agreement. I mean, things like that, then as long as they're in the process of building, I mean, I wouldn't want to tell the beach bar, hey, your building's not done,
No, I'm not saying that.
so sad, right? I mean, I think this, along the same lines as we're doing for the residents, if they're showing a will and have designs and architect and everything else, I mean, they may be waiting on, it's a little bit more complicated with commercial, because it's,
Sure.
you get a bigger number, and there's financing, and investors, and everything else. But as long as they're showing a will and a desire, and have plans that we have a drop dead date, but then we give them a 6-month extension as they're being rebuilt.
If they are in the process.
Right, they have to be in the process.
They have to be
They
in
just
the
can't.
process, just like residential.
Yeah, I
They
mean,
have to be in the process.
I know Madeline's here. I mean, Madeline can't have that thing there forever. But I know you have plans. Yeah, I know you have plans, but you just don't want somebody there forever and not have an intent to build.
So essentially, you're saying just copy what we did with commercial or
I would-
residential?
I would be okay doing that, because bear in mind, this is not your final decision on this. So this will be brought back to you. You can have more conversation, but it also gives certainty to the property owners as far as what are the rules, because right now it's very vague. And unfortunately, you may have another storm down the road, and then at least you already have a framework.
Nancy,
I know, I'm so
don't
sorry.
put that out in the universe.
But no, but seriously, then you already have a framework, and people know what to do, kind of anticipate, you're doing preparation.
Right, but I think that's pretty easy. I think most of the landowners and the business owners that are trying to build their own places back, but I think that's the easy bucket to take care of. Would you agree?
I think so. I mean, that
So
language.
the second bucket is now the moms and the mojos and the people renting, that they don't have control over their build back. So what do we do with those entities? 'Cause it's tough to tell mom, hey, you're, and she actually has a great landlord, but I know the Mojo's property is up for sale, and it's up in the air what Brian's going to do there. So I think we need to handle them a little bit differently if they're renters, or
Or could they move somewhere?
could they move,
because-
and then maybe you let them move to another commercial site that's right next door. I know you might have to move your place while you're building, correct? We don't want to tell her no,
Right.
but if she can move over to a nearby property while it's getting built, and same with the whale, I mean, they're gonna have to move somewhere.
So in that bucket, if the landlord has no issues, the property owner has no issues with the renter having a temporary structure, it's not a problem then, right?
Yeah, but again, we don't want this to go on forever. So
Right.
how do we,
I mean, you can't force a property owner to build a building, you know?
Right.
Or put it
And,
in for sale.
and no matter
whatever.
no matter what we decide, there's going to be people that get hurt from this.
Yeah.
There will be, unfortunately, and there's no other way to look at it. But yeah, I'm okay with moving forward with. I've been okay with that the whole time. Keep it the same, commercial and residential, and things are going to change between when the state of emergency gets lifted, and but I think we need to review some of these other ordinances to make sure they're not conflicting with each other.
Right.
Yeah,
so if we go down the road of a food truck, we would bring that back as well, like a food cut, the zone, I think it was characterized as.
Yeah.
It would be a separate ordinance change, but they could travel.
I think we need to look long and hard at providing that area. I think based on the emails, phone calls I've gotten, seems to be a need out there. And John, I totally understand your consideration about taxes and all that, but at some point, again, with more hotels opening up and more people just moving back on the island, I think we're going to have to temporarily create a zone, and it may take off and be fantastic, and it may not affect the other businesses, but I think we need to look at, maybe have a public workshop, maybe have some more discussions with, business owners and food trucks and residents, get everybody on the same page, and see what they think.
Well, I think that the zone thing, I think staff addressed that just by allowing more uses within the current districts that you have solves that issue. So if you want to, in the commercial boulevard, if you want to allow food trucks, that you don't have to create a new zone, you just allow the use within that current zoning district. I think, the elephant in the room here is some of these properties, we'll just use one at random. Just look at the small property that they had for the Heavenly Biscuit. What is the likelihood of being able to build anything on that property?
Well, that's hopefully where the developmental agreements will help.
Well, what I'm getting at is unless there's concessions with other things, heights, density, intensity, things like that, they're not going to be able to build anything. So do you want to back yourself into a corner and say you have to build something, but then on the other hand, you're saying there's no way you get to build what you need to build to make it work? You're kind of fighting yourself a little bit.
Right. I agree.
So is that where it comes in where, personally, I don't have a problem if mom's own, or not mom's, but Heavenly Biscuit owns that property. People love that little truck that sits there. They were a business that was existing on a small lot that it's going to be very difficult for them to build something. I don't personally have an issue with, it's fun, it's cool, it's, people like biscuits and it serves a purpose, and, it's mobile. If there's a storm, they can get it off the island. I'm talking just these small lots that we're dealing with that right now people can't build back without getting something more that's allowed. I'm okay with looking at how do you implement that into the new code or into the new ordinances to allow those uses, just to give some variety. But
Can you do, or how do you go about doing, to John's point, of mobile trucks or whatever, people that don't own, or you do a zone like that and they don't pay taxes, but is there some kind of business tax that can be assessed so that they are contributing?
We could charge them rents, right?
Well, rent would be one thing, but
Probably a permit fee or something like that, that was equivalent to whatever the tax may be on that square footage.
I was just going to say,
So that-
I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
no.
I was just going to suggest, just an example, it's not germane to what you were just talking about, Karen, but I think some of this will take care of itself. For example, the owner of Santini Plaza said, I'm happy to have food trucks in our parking lot, but once our brick and mortar restaurants open, they've got to go. And so it's and the private sector is sort of reflective of this philosophy to some extent. But the food court dynamic is interesting, particularly at the town hall property, because it's not in the heart of the entertainment district. It's not competing directly with other folks. It is indirectly, but
Right, and to your point, Vice Mayor, the city of Cape Coral had problems with this, with the food trucks coming in, business owners saying, hey, you're taking away our business, so they dedicated a specific space. Fort Myers, the same thing. They have specific space where you can go and put food trucks. We could contact those municipalities, see how they came up with that dynamic, and report back to you if it's something feasible that we could move forward, or if it's a paradigm that we might have to shift around and change to fit our particular thing here. Either way, it worked great for the viability of having a neat place for families or individuals to go and experience different things, and it didn't really take away from the mom and pop restaurants. I happen to live in the Cape. I can tell you that's the case. There's a ton of different restaurants up and down Del Prado, Pine Island, all those, the business districts, and yet we still have viable food trucks as well. It's a lot bigger footprint, a lot bigger city. I think it can work here, but we have to find the right footprint that fits here. And if you would allow us to come up with some metrics, we would definitely love to gather that.
Frankie, I think you know, John's point, find out what the fee schedule is
Sure,
and
sure.
you know, the lease
To make it
terms
fair.
and everything else, just so we get an overall, the more information we have, the better decision we can make.
Sure, we can put together all those metrics and get that back to you.
Well, I think we send it through the LPA, I think first, let them take a whack at it once you get all that, and let them get their input into it as well, and then that would help Nancy be able to draft something a little more in line with today's discussion, I guess, but
So you've hit 3 of the 4 buckets, and the one that will generate
well,
more.
before we move on, Nancy, I
Yeah.
just want to finish with everybody to see how they feel about the recommendation of using the same timeline, if you will, right now, moving
Okay.
forward, that we did with residential. Because I think I heard,
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, just so there's some certainty in the marketplace. Now, that doesn't mean it's a hard, we're not going to change it. I think if, you know, the SB
250, whatever.
250 changes, then, you know, we need to adapt with the state. But I think we just need to have some certainty,
Some guidelines.
some guidelines. I think everybody would be okay with that.
And I think just so folks are clear, and I think this is our intent, is that deadline isn't you're toast at that deadline. No, the deadline is by that deadline you need to demonstrate that you've got a plan of attack. Is that right? Are we all on the same page on that?
And I think
Yeah.
Yes.
I think commercially, there's going to be, again, you're going to have, you know, interest rates, you're going to have, you know, 1031. There's way more dynamics in a commercial property. And I think just we need to guide town staff that, hey, you know, there's just more moving parts with a commercial operation than there is a residence. Yeah, although residents are faced with the same challenges, you know, of interest rates and building costs and everything else, but just as long as you're demonstrating that you want to get this in the ground and you've met with staff and maybe come up with a developmental agreement, or at least, you know, spoken to staff about a plan, then you're demonstrating that you want to move forward. I think that's the key.
And I think we have to be careful with our messaging. So it's deadline to demonstrate you've got a plan of attack, a substantive plan
Correct.
of attack, not a deadline that you're out.
Your trailer's got to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we don't want to scare people, but I think that's a good compromise. Yeah.
John, how do you feel?
I'm more than happy with it.
Okay?
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I think one thing we can also look at, since we've got that property, is current businesses who are now going to have to move off that property to build, and so they don't close. Maybe that's an option. They can move temporarily and pay permit fees or whatever on town property instead of bringing new ones in. Let's look at our locals first and see, and kind of cater to our local establishments, so they don't have to shut down or try to find another piece of property that's, you know, other end of the island they're used to down here. At least this is a little more centrally located. Just something else to think about.
I think it goes to what the comp plan asked for, you know, a living park. You know, it's a living, moving, you know. So you got that. Now we can go to your buckets. I think now that we
The
under,
last one, and this is the tough one.
Okay.
This is properties where a business was not located prior to Ian, and is different.
Yeah.
So this is the tough one.
we'll start with you, John.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. In John's defense, Nancy, what is the legal flexibility that we have?
Let's do this. What currently is where are we currently? So we can. That's our starting point. What does code say? What is if somebody wanted to open up today?
On a temporary basis, I
Right.
don't think it's really addressed. I think
Okay.
that's one of the fundamental problems.
Well, I know, but let's
With
just,
this
people are
one.
watching, they're trying, we're talking about
Right.
a lot of stuff. I know what it is, but I just want to make sure that whomever's watching, that they understand where we're coming from to get to this decision, so.
So I'll still ask the question, Nancy, are we allowed to discriminate? In other words, can we,
Well, how are we discriminating? I mean, race, sex, national
well, we're
origin.
discriminating existing, pre-existing versus new, right?
But policy reasons for that. It depends. I mean, it's not crystal clear cut.
Yep, that's my question. So we can make that discernment?
I need to see exactly what characteristics you're going to apply. If they're an existing business as opposed to one that has not come back on the island. Is that the first
Can you
distinction?
legally do that? That's, I think, Jim's question.
I have to do more research. I don't know that, in my own little opinion, I think it would be okay to do, but I want to make sure that it's all right.
I appreciate that. I don't want to have an extensive conversation on that if it's a moot point that if we can and can't. I don't want to scare people. I don't want to generate a lot of news if we can't even do it. So my suggestion, Mr. Mayor, I mean, we could talk about it a little bit, but I would suggest that Nancy do some research and then we kick this back to the LPA with the guidance that we've established already this morning and let them chew on it a little bit and see if we can come up with something that works for everybody.
Well, repeat that bucket again. I was interested. I want to hear how you worded it.
Businesses that were not in operation prior to Hurricane Ian, but are now coming onto the property.
Okay. So in this
That are
case,
not otherwise permitted, I guess.
well, in
we'd
this
have to-
in this case, that would be a landowner is wanting to have a business come on that wasn't there before.
Right.
I think, to me, to keep it all clean and simple, you have the same thing that we just talked about. I mean, I don't like to use the word discriminate, but do we really want to
Differentiate
do
is
we
where
want
I
to
was going.
differentiate? I mean, if that's a landowner and it's
Does it make a
something,
difference?
Does it make a difference? If they have something there. I mean, I don't want.
But again, he's got to demonstrate that he's going to be building back.
That's what I was getting at. So if someone wants to come in and set up shop for the next year, that knowing that they're only going to be able to be there for another year because their landowner is not demonstrating that they want to do anything moving forward, it's a slippery slope. And then you get into you can't go hook up to their trailer with the truck and pull it off the property. So, I mean, you know what I mean? Maybe you're right, but maybe that's. I don't know if there's a
Maybe
good answer
that's
for
where
this
we're
one.
not able to move forward and provide clear direction on it at this point.
Well, if we
So-
can't, if I could segue or to this, Nancy, Mr. Town Manager, Mr. Director of Operations, is we have this. We don't talk about it very much, but we probably should. We've got this quandary with two of our core sort of retail plazas, if you will, with Chiastero and Seagrape. Are there things that we can do either through the negotiating process with the litigation issue and or incentives or enforcement where we can encourage the owner to once again make these plazas hospitable for small businesses on the island? I mean, in your experience, is there anything when you have an intransigent I'll try to be kind here, challenging owner who's not working in the public interest? I'm a big fan of the free market system, but this is clearly hampering our redevelopment. What can we do? Anything?
I have it actually on my list today to try to have the conversation with Frankie and code enforcement to kind of see why is that business not operational? Is it a physical issue with the building where tenants are not coming, or is it just
The rent.
yeah?
Yeah, or is
business
the
type?
parking business model better than having tenants? I mean, I'm just asking. I don't know, and if that's the situation, that's not a public policy that we want to encourage.
That is correct. The parking violation that currently exists, he does have an avenue for compliance, but has not proceeded down that path at this point. He has changed attorneys. I believe he's now engaged a land use attorney who might assist getting him down that compliance route. But it's a different land use approval that would have to go through the process.
You know, I don't want to get too far off the rails here talking about, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Jim, but I think what we're trying to figure out here is if I'm a landowner, how are we going to, if I'm a landowner now that doesn't have a business, a temporary business on it,
Right.
what policy decision are we making, or do we want to make going forward to allow or not allow someone to set up shop? I think that's what we're temporarily,
You
right?
mean in a mobile?
In a mobile, do we want to say no more mobile? I mean, 2 months from now, a landowner that doesn't have anything or hasn't had anything may decide that they want something temporary while they're. I think that's what we're trying to get at, if I'm not mistaken. What's the policy we want to direct or?
And it's a great question.
Yeah.
But it sounds like our lawyer needs to do a little more research before you can give us a
Yes.
definitive answer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, this issue will come back to you. We'll try to put something together based on the conversation that we've had today, and then we'll see where we go from there.
But I guess I'm struggling with what research needs to be done. We just had someone that came in and got a temporary use permit to be set up on a property that is a different use than what was there before. We're not really giving staff any direction as to if someone comes in tomorrow and wants to set
Well-
up something on Hooters property.
So the question would be.
That wasn't here before. Are we okay with that?
Was that use permitted under the current land development code, or is this a use that is not permitted by the code, which is what these temporary uses are for, to allow, mobile,
But this goes back, we have an ordinance that says these mobile vendors are not allowed. So this is a temporary use, so I don't know how you could say, we've got this ordinance that says you can't do it, but temporarily you can. So how do we direct staff to say issue a permit or don't issue a permit? Because technically, it's not allowed, but
Again, I think the easy answer is for now until, the town attorney says otherwise. I mean, you don't want to limit, I understand you're protecting the current businesses, but, property rights and everything else and just marketplace, if somebody wants to open a mobile dog grooming place or, a clinic, or to Jim's point, if there's a need for the island, I don't know why the town would get involved prohibiting that.
well, I'm not saying prohibit it, but is there things that you could put in there, like you have to be run on power, you can't be running
Well, yeah,
generators, things like that?
absolutely, sure.
Like, could
Yeah.
that be a conditional part of your temporary
I think you
use?
have that as far as the residential component as well, that they have to be, tied down, and in the event of a storm, they have to comply.
Well, I think just running off of a temporary pole versus generators running all
Right.
day,
I think they need to have temporary power, no generator. I mean, I think
Right.
and that's been some of the issue with what's going on in Times Square is one business is running off a generator all day and everybody else that's running off of power has to listen to it.
I think, in my mind, the distinction is the fact that in the absence of the current situation that we find ourselves in, that temporary use would not be allowed. So that's where your other ordinance comes into play, that under normal circumstances, we have no temporary vendors. But because we're in kind of this build back recovery mode, then we're going to make an exception to allow some of this for perhaps some uses that are not currently available on the island for a limited period of time. That's where I'm seeing the distinction.
Is it 6 months? Is it?
I think you go
18
back
or
to your, September 28th, 2025. Dan, I think it'd be hard for us as a town to say, you can't open that business, you can't open that business.
I agree.
I think we want to encourage businesses to reopen. And again, I think the market's going to determine, if the voodoo shop's going to work, if the puppy daycare is going to work, whatever it is. I mean, I think there, as Jim said, I don't have this problem, but, you know, Jim needs his haircut all the time. So, I mean, if there's a need, then an entrepreneur is going to come in and fill that need. So I think splitting hairs as to what kind of business, I think, you know, as long as we have a deadline, then, I mean,
And I
again,
don't-
they have to demonstrate that they're going to do something with their property.
Yeah, and I don't have an issue with that either. It's just some of the things that you can control, like I said, the power and the generators and the things like that. I think, you know, if you're going to be living around something, you want to make it as least intrusive as possible.
Right,
For the other
yeah.
people that are living or working around there. And if someone wants to, say, like you said, whether it's dog grooming or donut shop, whatever, you know, if they're running on if it's a use, well, I shouldn't say it that way. If it's a commercial property that had a commercial use on it, I don't necessarily have an issue if they set up a temporary use, as long as they're, you know, I keep saying the power, but that's one thing, and I'm sure there's other things that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head that'll make it a little bit less intrusive for neighbors. But with that deadline that you were saying, I hate deadline, with the time frame of you've got until you're a renter coming in, the landowner's got until this much time to show that they're trying to move forward. And those are the ones I think, unfortunately, that are going to have to move.
Yeah,
They're
but
gonna have
you know
to.
that now they know that their action has to be taken. I think it may be that the places that could get fixed back up, they're incentivized because they know that there's going to be 4 or 5 or 6 businesses that are going to be looking for a place. So it might speed up them getting their place open.
Mayor, if I may, I think one thing you see, for instance, in Times Square, if you're bringing in, and I'm bringing a food truck or anything in for one day or 180 days, that the owner of the property needs to have the power available so we plug into it. Those generators do create a health issue, and I just think that would be incumbent upon the property owner to provide that kind of power hookup or.
But can we be
hookup.
retroactive at this point?
Of course, if he wants to make revenue, he's got to provide
Any
basic
landlord would.
services.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
any
totally
landlord
agree with
would.
that.
Let me throw something out here, maybe go down a side street.
Yeah.
I'm glad that excited you. We all know and have been discussing around about the business that pretty much brought this to a head. See what I did there?
I did.
It's a legal business. It's a legal business, but part of that was optics. I mean, that just looks like crap. Is that something that can be addressed as a sign ordinance? Is that a rolling sign that we could address the optics that way to make it look more appealing, more pleasant?
No, you probably will run into First Amendment issues
Okay.
with that time,
Just
place,
wanted-
and manner.
And it was a short street, and apparently it was a cul-de-sac.
Sorry.
No outlet.
It had the
No
potential
outlet,
of being
yeah.
a budding
Content
question.
Well,
regulation.
So do you have enough, you think,
I
there,
have
Nancy,
plenty,
to be able
yes.
to formulate something to take it to the LPA and let them throw a few things at it and come up with some more
Yes.
ideas? And
But I will say quite candidly that that last bucket that we really talked a lot about, we will put something in writing, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can tell us if we're wrong or if we're right, and maybe make it better.
well, we can't
You
vote
know-
on anything now, but right. So
Yeah.
how do we give them direction going forward if someone comes in tomorrow that wants to do a temporary use on a property, like for the electric thing? How do we empower
On a commercial property?
on a commercial power? How do we empower the staff to say, without a temp pole, if you're running a generator, you're not going to get your temporary use permit? Can we do that? Or if,
I don't think we have the authority in your code to actually allow that. I think it's been allowed in the spirit of rebuilding and recovery. But I will double check with those that have been issuing the permits and their basis for that.
and can it be retroactive? Can you go back to
Yes, we could go
and
back
say,
retroactively.
you've got your
I-
permit, but we need you to do this?
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, there's also a couple other checks and balances that we could put in place immediately, and that would be requiring someone coming in for a temp use to give us a start and tentative end date, because it would be the property owner that would be coming in and requesting a permit on their property. So that would establish already a semblance of idea what they wanted to do going forward. If they knew that the poodle grooming was coming in and he's only going to be here for the 3 months, when we apply for that temporary use permit and that 3 months is up, he's already breaking ground for his brick and mortar store or selling the property at that point, we could at least have a timeline established when they came in for that application. At least an idea, something that staff could kind of check back periodically with and say, hey, you remember when you came in? It's very similar to the trailers that we allow, the temp use for the trailers in the residential areas. Hey, you come back in 6 months, hey, how you doing? You know, those type of things. And I think it would be a good way to kind of keep track of the few that are out there and not let it get ahead of us.
And I've seen the comments out there too about, well, technically we're in trailers, right? And but I assure you, we're working very diligently to get out of them. So it's not for lack of intent, right? So we're not trying to exclude the town from doing the same thing.
So one last comment, and I'll speak with Becky about it. There is the pending ordinance doctrine that might give a little bit more certainty once we get something drafted and it starts in the process. That might help staff as well.
Okay. Is there anything else on this?
No, I have plenty of notes.
It's clear as mud, right? It is. Got it? Okay. Next is agenda management. This, I don't have it in front of me. Is there anything anyone would like to add to the next M&P in March? Well, no. It'd be for April. It says March is why.
One thing I want to call out, I really would like to get a strategic planning session set up sometime in April, so we'll continue to talk about this. Going to try to find somebody from Florida Gulf Coast University to kind of lead it for us a little bit, so I'll just keep you posted. That's coming.
One thing I'd like to add, if there's anyone else that, we've had discussions with the county about Crescent Park. It'd be nice to have a discussion about thoughts and ideas of what the community and we want to see done, because they're asking us what we would like to see done there. We've also, I'll tell you, we've also thrown out, is there a path to the town being able to acquire that back? Is that something that they would entertain? So I think having that discussion about Crescent Park would be an important one if someone else feels that's important.
I totally agree.
Okay, gonna add that to it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to also add, I haven't had a chance to ask Andy and Frankie about this first, so sorry about this, but I'd like to add to an M&P a discussion on the permitting dynamic. We've made a lot of progress, and instead, I should have said the other day, instead of we're not getting any complaints anymore, we're actually getting compliments, which have been tremendous. But I think it would be helpful for our residents and our businesses and our condo folks to have, since we have a new building official with kind of a new philosophy, new approach, just to share what he and his staff are seeing on the front lines, mistakes they're seeing, common errors that could be avoided, advice to both residents, businesses, and condos. Just because I think it would really be great to either, we can do it through you guys and then maybe have Joe here, but if Joe's comfortable presenting or having some of his staff present, what do they see when people come in to visit? What are the common challenges and how we doing? And it kind of advice, best practices as people go through the permitting process, especially with this new trailer arrangement that's designed to sort of be one-stop shopping. What's that experience like for somebody who comes here? Is it better to come here? Is it better to call? Can you email? Just that kind of conversation, I think, could be helpful, just and informative to folks. If I could get an amen on that from somebody.
Yes,
Amen.
yes,
All right.
yes. I thought the silence was the amen.
I did too. No objection was the amen, but yeah.
Yeah. I forgot to bring this up on Monday, so if you let me proceed out over just a little bit, it's not an M&P thing, but does council feel it would be important to have, and I haven't talked to Frankie or anybody yet, do we feel it would be important to have Chris Holly come down at the next meeting and kind of give us a legislative update
Yes.
as to, what he saw, what he found, what he's heard? I mean, he's no longer under town's contract anymore, but I think having him here to give an update to everybody and hear it from someone other than Andy, Frankie, or myself
Would it be good, that'd be great, Mr. Mayor, but is any chance that Ron Book could come as well?
We could certainly, we can ask him, but I think at the very, or Rana, or, someone,
Whoever you think, yeah.
It's very timely since the session's supposed to end tomorrow.
Right.
yeah.
I think
So
that'd be great.
I think once, they'll be able to tell us kind of give us an update as to.
MMP, next MMP or council?
No, I think just at the council meeting, just maybe have him, if he can,
We'll figure it out.
and reach out to him, see if he can, and have him come in and just, him and Ron or Rana,
Okay.
and just give us an update of how it closed out, how it finished out, how the town's looking, where it's at. Has the governor agreed or vetoed things? That kind of thing. I think that would be helpful at the beginning of the next meeting.
So I have one last thing. I don't know if it's the last thing. I have one other thing. And I don't know if anyone else is hearing this, but a farmer's market at Times Square, not so much the one at Moss Marine because it's very open and nothing is there before, but I'm hearing a lot of pushback from some of the businesses that are in Times Square about the farmer's market, the layout blocking entrances to existing businesses, having too many of the same businesses that exist on Times Square, i.e. jewelry, that kind of thing, competing businesses that they come in just on the weekends and all of a sudden they have all this competition. I don't know how that's addressed. I don't know if that's just taken up separately with the management of farmers markets or how that all plays, but I've gotten 3 calls on it.
I can speak out to some of that. I stop down there every Friday morning on my way in at 6:30. I talk to the millers who are the ones that are running it. We've had numerous complaints that have come to us as well. We've had code go down there and check, both from vendors and at the farmers market and vendors that are currently established in Times Square. Every week seems to be a different challenge as far as somebody staking out something that doesn't belong to them, whether it's a current vendor in Times Square or the farmers market. So it is kind of an ongoing thing to keep everybody on task, on schedule, so to speak. We always make adjustments every Friday morning where they may have encroached and we've gotten a phone call, or a business thinking that they're entitled to more property of Times Square than they actually have. So it's a give and take each week, and it is a pushback each week. They're doing their due diligence, I'll put it that way, to kind of keep their vendors in check. And it's up to the town, and we've tried to do that as well with code, to go out there and keep the permanent vendors in Times Square in check, i.e. taping off parts of the brick walkway that really doesn't exist or belong to them, putting up bike racks that are not conducive to foot traffic, or on their, put it on their property, not on Times Square property. So it's at times it's kind of futile, but we are making a lot more progress than we did in the beginning.
Okay.
And yes, we have people that are probably not getting what they thought they'd get on both sides, but we are trying to find a compromise each and every Friday.
I think just to piggyback on that, if we have our staff trained in traffic mitigation now, if that is completed, we need something out there on Friday and Saturday for those 2 markets from 9 to 1.
So what we can do, our staff is trained in crosswalks only.
Okay.
There's a conflict of
Well, there's 5
information.
right there at that intersection.
Correct, but there's a conflict of information whether or not they can actually do intersections. There's nothing in the state statute, nothing in the state criminal law that says that they can't, being certified, but we are checking that and making sure. We've got a little pushback from LCSO, and we don't want to definitely encroach on that.
So if
In
we could
case
do
there's a-
crosswalk, we could
can
do
definitely do
the pedestrian crosswalk
and we can
at the
definitely
light
have
at
it
the
out
base of
there
the
at those
bridge,
times.
right?
Yes,
We
sir.
could do it there for sure,
Yes, sir.
but you'd have to look into time. I mean, that,
Intersection is the only, and when I say intersection, we're talking about the one at Crescent. We're not, according to what we've heard, they're not
Crescent.
certified
No,
for
I'm not
stoplight
talking
control.
Crescent. I'm talking, I'm talking, no, I'm not even talking that one, because what you're saying would be the same issue at Crescent. I'm talking about the non-working light at the base of the bridge where we used to have the volunteer with the Snoop, or the big Snoopy hand out there, whatever it was. That can we at least have our staff work that crosswalk? Because
Yes,
it's not
sir.
an intersection, it's just a crosswalk. It's a
Yes, sir.
pedestrian crosswalk. That's a start, at least.
But too, ever since LCSO pulled off at Old San Carlos and Estero up at Times Square, I mean, that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. So I don't know I like having the two guys at, Margaritaville, but maybe there needs to be a third because that intersection, it backs up all the way on the bridge now. And it's probably the last 3 weeks of March, we've got every spring break in the world happening right now, but
And this coming weekend is kind of the perfect storm for a lot of things with the farmer's market, Shrimp Fest, all that happening all at once. But yes, we will definitely get it to Captain Layler and our staff.
It
Well, and the
actually
bridge
comes from the
being
people
closed on top of it.
who do the assigning of it. Captain Layler suggests, but we'll talk to him as well, just to keep him in the loop.
Yeah, anything we can do, if our trained staff can legally be out there and doing it, that's something that we can control then.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Scott, got anything to add?
No, sir.
John?
None.
Jim?
That's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. I was getting to you.
Okay.
Amy?
I just want to say as a reminder, the next meeting on the 18th will be held over in Bay Oaks because Supervisor of Election Staff will be in here for the presidential primaries, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Okay.
So just a reminder, we're not here. We'll be over there on the 18th.
Back to the old stomping grounds.
So the town meeting on Monday, March 18th at 9 o'clock will be at Bay Oaks.
Correct.
Let Becky know.
You let her know.
Yeah.
Move to adjourn?
Oh, good. We got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 11:16.